Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome back to Stately Bookworm Manor. And I am the poor man's Michael K. Vaughan art. Welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey. We are exploring my bookshelves, and today I am doing Michael K. Vaughan's Astounding Science Fiction book tag. I will leave the fun introduction to Michael. He does such a great job with that. He also has a mummy on his channel named Roger, which is really cool. And about the only thing I have here to keep me company is a Minecraft axolotl. I don't even know if it has a name. It's not even mine, but he's just here keeping me company right now for some reason because I am hiding out in my son's bedroom to get this recorded. I was tagged to do this by Josh over at the Sci-Fi Bookery, which is a wonderful channel too. I love classics and Victorian literature, things like that, mysteries, but science fiction is really the gateway of how I became an avid reader. So this tag was really fun to visit and reflect on my reading life as a science fiction fan. So a big thanks to Josh for tagging me in this. Confession time, he tagged me back all the way in October of last year, and I'm just now getting to it. I get behind, I get a to-do list together, and then I ignore it. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this book tag. And I do want to, and if you watch his tag video, he mentions something about the Ray Bradbury Short Story Club, and I do have an update for that, but I'm going to wait till the end of the video. So stay tuned to the end of the video and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But let's go ahead and get started on the book tag. All right, first of all, the question is, what was your first science fiction book? That was really hard for me to remember. I think my entry into science fiction itself was like many kids of the 80s and 90s. It was Star Wars. And I'm trying to think of books I might have read as a kid that would have been science fiction. I might have read some Tom Swift, which is kind of a sci-fi version of the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew. So it might have been some of those, but I don't really remember getting into sci-fi until my early teens. I mean, Ray Bradbury and Arthur C. Clarke were some of the first books of that genre I read. I did read a lot of H.G. Wells as well. I didn't care for Jules Verne as much, but I would say probably those three writers were some of the first science fiction books that I read, and that just got me into reading sci-fi. You know, The Martian Chronicles is probably the first science fiction book I read that just hit me like a gut punch. Just powerful story, powerful novel, and really developed my reading habits and tastes. So then the second question is, what is the last sci-fi book you've read? And it looks like I've only read one this year so far, which I need to up my game on that. But I read The Pirates of Venus by Edgar Rice Burroughs. That was another author I read a lot of as a teenager. I really loved the Venus series. I read it before the Mars series even. And I remember really enjoying that. And then revisiting it just this past month, I'm not sure I enjoyed it quite as much, but it did bring back a lot of memories of, enjoying the space travel, the adventuring, the daring do, just a classic pulp science fiction type story. But that story deals with a man named Carson who decides, because he's bored, I don't know, he decides to go to Venus and builds a spaceship and shoots himself off into space. Well, actually, in the first book, he decides to go to Mars, but then gets off course and ends up on Venus. And there's this whole fantasy culture of aliens that live underneath the cloud canopy. They live in trees, and he has adventures with them. And actually, as reading it, I was really reminded of the Avatar movie by James Cameron, which I'm not a big fan of, but Edgar Rice Burroughs does it so much better. Avatar kind of just seemed like a copy of it in some ways, not in every way, but there are some parallels there when you dig down into the structure of the story, or the theme of the story. I enjoyed it, not as, like I said, as much as when I was a kid, because I get kind of tired of the Carson just being able to do everything perfectly. And But what I do appreciate about this is that he more adapts himself to their culture and isn't trying to, change their culture to adapt to his. It's kind of a mutual learning experience, and he changes to fit into their culture, which I kind of appreciated that. Although I've got to say, there's probably some racist plot lines in it as well. Some implications about an alien race with a different color skin that is just did not age well. But you gotta remember those things as you go into these old stories. Third question is, when did you first start loving science fiction? And I think it was again watching Star Wars as a kid and loving that whole kind of space opera kind of storytelling, which is really what Edgar Rice Burroughs has a lot of. I think that's probably why I enjoyed his stories so much. Somewhere along the way, I don't know where or how, but I got introduced to the idea of time travel, and that's become one of my favorite stories to read about in science fiction is time travel. That I find it so fascinating, and that's probably in part because I love history too, and the thought of being able to go back in time to watch history is really really amazing. If I had the opportunity to time travel sometime, I would be very tempted to take it. Although I'd be careful not to step on any butterflies. But yeah, I'd have to say Star Wars is probably my gateway into it, and that to this day I love Star Wars. I got a lot of unpopular opinions in my video today. For the first one here is that I love all the Star Wars movies that have come out to varying degrees, but I love the TV series that they've had. I've read most of the books, although I've kind of stopped reading the books, especially because a lot of them were no longer considered canon, and then they started writing new books set in the movie series, and I just thought, you know what, I'm just gonna watch the films. There does come a point where it becomes to be too much information, and I feel like the books, they're kind of tied as to what they can do. They can't, have like certain characters killed off or something because they might show up in a movie down the road, and they have to be careful about that. So, well, as a teenager, then I really got also into Star Trek, thanks to a little bit because of the Next Generation, but then Deep Space Nine. I remember I was 15, I think, when that series started, so I got to watch from the first episode, and so that really became my Star Trek show. And I think to this day, it's the best Star Trek show that has been made. And you can fight me on that. I don't fight, but you're welcome to your wrong opinion. Well, I think what I liked about Deep Space Nine is that the darker storylines, I liked that it eventually became a series that you had to keep watching, because if you missed an episode, you might not know what's going on. And I like that sort of storytelling. The Next Generation, you could watch one episode in the third season and another episode in the fifth season, and nothing's really changed. Some of the characters will have gone through some traumatic experiences in an episode, and the next episode they're fine. And that always bugged me. Although they began to shy away from it a little bit, and once in a while they would refer to something in the past, but overall it was just kind of you could just pick up wherever. And I like more of a serial storytelling. That's what I liked about Deep Space Nine. And also the fact that, as they were on a space station, I felt like they were a little more trapped when trouble came. Like with the Enterprise, if they were fighting or shooting or whatever, they could fly away and regroup and come back or whatever. But on Deep Space Nine, they were stuck there, and they had to deal with it, and they had to work through the problem. And that really appealed to me. So yeah, that was a great show. Okay, next question. What is your favorite science fiction movie? Oh wow, not sure. I would have to say The Empire Strikes Back, but I think there's a lot of nostalgia with that. But you have classic good versus evil. You have the story structure itself is built differently. You have the big battle at the beginning of the film, and then you have a more personal, quieter, well, sort of quieter ending to it, where you have Luke versus Vader and that dramatic revelation. I don't know if I was young enough to know what that felt like to be revealed of Darth Vader's Luke Skywalker's father. Sorry, spoiler alert, but so I have no idea what that felt like to original audiences. From how ever early I remember Star Wars, I always knew that those two were related. And in fact, I also knew, couldn't figure out why Luke and Leia kept kissing each other so much if they were brother and sister. But I remember watching, I think the first film I saw in theaters was Return of the Jedi, which was great. But yeah, Empire Strikes Back is a great science fiction film, one of my favorites. Trying to think of anything more modern that's come along. There's been a lot that I've enjoyed. I like alien invasion films, so some of my favorites, and I'm going to cheat and give you more than one, but I've enjoyed Independence Day. That was classic, just classic alien invasion film. And then also M. Night Shyamalan's movie Signs. I love that film. It's like Independence Day, but from the point of view of one family, and how do they deal with that, and how do they protect each other. And this is a broken family because the main character, he's he's a priest, and he's lost his faith in God because of his wife's death, and he thinks God has abandoned him and that God is hurting him and punishing him. And then these aliens show up, and his kids are weird and they're not acting right, and there's danger everywhere. There's so many mysterious things happening around, and just the visuals, the tension that's built, and then the resolution of him figuring out what and maybe why God let those things happen, or even the idea that those bad things happened, but God was able to use that to help save their life later. It's a really powerful film about, I think, about faith and science. And I don't know if it gets as much credit as it deserves, but that's a wonderful film, one of my favorites, and I can still watch it and get the shivers, and I love it. Next is what is your favorite science fiction TV show? Well, I've already talked about one, and Deep Space Nine. Let me tell you about the other, is Lost. It was coming out, what was it, early 2000s or so? Ran about 5 or 6 seasons, and I was hooked from the first episode. I didn't watch it as it was coming out weekly. The second season was just starting when I started watching it on something called DVDs through Netflix. And I loved the ongoing mysteries of it. I loved the slight science fiction elements to it. And then as the seasons went on, it started taking some really strange twists and turns, and time travel was introduced and all sorts of things. Here's another hot take that's maybe not as popular, but I loved the show from start to finish. I loved the ending, especially, again, I guess it's a theme of faith and science, which, come to think of it, is also a big theme of Deep Space Nine. So I might have just found myself, I think I just helped me figure out some of what I like about science fiction and what kind of stories I like. Wow, that's amazing. I don't think I'd put that together yet. Anyway, but yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I don't feel at all cheated by the ending like some have complained. I feel like, yes, it left some answers unresolved, but either I felt like there was enough information there that I could think about it and come up with a good answer, or it was answered on the show. All right, is there a science fiction book that you think people should read more often? And I'm going to steal this one from Josh. He mentioned Fahrenheit 451, and I second that wholeheartedly. It's a book that a lot of teenagers will read in high school, but it is something adults should revisit, especially today. With there's a lot of discussion about censorship and about banning books. I haven't really followed the whole arguments about this latest controversy with a publisher changing some of Roald Dahl's language and words that he uses in his stories. Though it's my understanding that they're still offering the unedited versions, but they're also offering a different version for those who might not like some of the language that he uses in the story. And so I haven't really had a chance to think through that. My initial gut reaction is, I think censorship, generally speaking, is not a good thing. I think everyone needs to read Fahrenheit 451, and It's a story that is becoming more and more relevant as time goes on. And Ray Bradbury was very passionate about speaking against the whole book burning culture. And later in his life, he said that, you don't have to burn books to destroy a culture, just get people to stop reading them. He also at one time said, there's more than one way to burn a book, and the world is full of people running about with lit matches. So, I think it's something that we should think through. Some of the language and descriptions that Roald Dahl uses, I think that should invite discussion about what he used. Was it appropriate? How has our culture changed from that? And I think those are good discussions to have, especially with your children. But I understand, the desire to not, to not see that language and those perspectives as being good or healthy or wholesome. That can that sort of language can be very harmful to people. So I think it's something we need to be careful about, but definitely something that we can open discussion over. And I read a lot of Victorian novels, and some novels really, are, as I say, are a reflection of their time. And you come across things that are racist, and and I'm looking at it from a completely different perspective than somebody who might be of a a minority culture or somebody like that would read a very poor representation of themselves. Like, for instance, in Oliver Twist, Dickens writes a Jewish character, Fagin, very unflattering. And I'm reading Oliver Twist right now, and I was really enjoying it until I get to that part. And, now it's just, it's hard to read that, as wonderful a villain that Fagin is. The fact that Dickens ties so much of his ethnicity into his being a villain is really kind of, it's hard to read, just to be honest. And I can't imagine a Jewish person, what they would feel like reading that. Although I did have a really wonderful interview with a Jewish writer, Nancy Chernin, who wrote a book called Dear Mr. Dickens, about a real-life woman who wrote Dickens a letter kind of confronting him about his racist portrayal of Fagin. His response to it is a really incredible story. I'll link that interview and stuff in the show notes. Well, I didn't end up meaning to talk about Dickens, but, what's a Bookshelf Odyssey video without me mentioning Dickens, right? All right, well, I got off topic. What's next? What is your favorite science fiction short story? And pretty much anything written by Ray Bradbury. I think A Sound of Thunder was probably one of the earliest of his stories I read that really caught my attention, gave me an enjoyment of the short story format and helped me see what he could do, what Bradbury could do with just, 10 pages of prose. It's an incredible story. Speaking of which, stay tuned for the end. We're almost there. I'm going to talk about the Ray Bradbury Short Story Club here in a minute. And then, what is your favorite science fiction book? Well, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it would definitely be The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, or, who also occasionally would write about faith and science. So there's that theme again. I just read a trilogy last year that I think, given time as I think about it, it's going to become an absolute favorite. And it's the Lady Astronaut series by Mary Robinette Kowal. And it takes place starts in the 1950s, I believe. And it's in an alternate universe of Earth where a massive extinction level asteroid hits Earth, and the space program gets kicked into high gear because they have to get off planet and they have to get to Mars if the human species is going to survive. It also tells a great science fiction story, closer in line to like The Martian, or I'm actually reading this right now, Project Hail Mary, that, it's science problems that they have to overcome, and along with some, racial problems and personality problems and all of that it's, as I got reading it and realizing, there's not really a bad guy in this. There's some characters that aren't good, or they're a little bit of an antagonist, but overall, the problem is the antagonist is the asteroid and the fact that Earth is going to be dead, in 50 years. But some people don't believe the science, and others feel like they're going to be the ones left behind, and that all the white men are going going to escape and leave behind all the different races and cultures and all these things that probably would have been there in the 1950s. And, let's be fair, maybe it would be a little bit even today. But yeah, that's a fantastic series of books that I really enjoyed. And I could see that becoming that trilogy, that series becoming some of my favorite science fiction books. All right, tag. Who am I going to tag? I was looking through my channels, and I don't know if I have a lot of booktube channels that read science fiction. And I don't know if he's done this yet. I tried to look and see, I couldn't find one, but I'm going to tag Nerdius in the channel, or to do this tag. Again, I don't even know if he does book tags, but at the very least, you can go check out his channel if you like science fiction. He has some great science fiction content. I'd be really interested to hear his answers on these, and you can check out his channel. It's a great one. All right, well, that'll do it for today and the Astounding Science Fiction book tag. Thank you, Josh, for tagging me. Oh, I almost forgot the Ray Bradbury Short Story Club. So one of the problems I had starting it is I kind of jumped in, but my challenge was knowing what story to read next. And we read a couple. I had at least one video of one of the stories, and then I got kind of sick here at the beginning of the year, and things got pushed back, and I just decided to take some time to kind of regroup and rethink about what I want to do, both on this channel and as well as book clubs and book reading and prompts and things, something that I can be sure I can be able to keep up on. What I've decided to do is, instead of picking stories here and there, I'm going to just pick one of his short story books and then work through that collection, over the next year, doing a story a month still, but being able to have a video to talk about the story or talk about it with someone. I really enjoyed that when Josh and I were able to get together and talk about A Sound of Thunder. That was a lot of fun, and I want to do more like that. So anyway, the collection I've picked to start with is called The October Country. And this is because I can't afford the actual copy of Dark Carnival, which is his very first short story collection. I think only like 1,200 were printed, and they're like $500 to $1,000 on eBay right now. But in this collection, it was published a little bit later, and 15 of the stories from Dark Carnival were brought in to this collection. It looks like a lot of these stories are some of his earliest ones, from even before he says here in the introduction that was written before he was even 26 years old. And when you realize some of the stories in this book, it's amazing at the talent he had to write. And I'm looking through the contents here, and I'll post the contents down below, because as I found out doing a buddy read of Bradbury, sometimes some of the additions will change a story out for something different. So just so we can be all on the same page. We've got stories like The Dwarf, Skeleton, The Jar, The Lake, The Emissary, The Small Assassin, The Crowd, Jack in the Box, The Scythe, The Wind, Homecoming, just some really wonderful, creepy stories that I think will be a great read throughout this next year and a half or so. So get yourself a copy of The October Country, and we will, for March, read the first story called The Dwarf. That might be a story that hasn't aged well, so we'll see. And I certainly not wanting to offend anyone, but if there's language there and things that haven't aged well, we'll talk about that. We'll discuss that and see what we can learn from it. But that one, if I remember right, it's a story about a dwarf who goes into a carnival fun house of mirrors, and creepy things happen. So we're going to start with that. We're going to be reading through The October Country over this next year. We'll take one story a month. Look over in my community tab, and I will have the list posted there as far as what month we're covering which story. So you can read them in this copy, or you can get an omnibus edition and just find the stories here or there. I just think this is going to be a better way for me to stay on track. And like I said, this covers some of my absolute favorite Bradbury stories. Let me know below if you want to read along with us. Again, I do have a Discord channel where we can comment and talk, although I haven't been very active in there, and that's kind of a my fault kind of thing, but feel free to post something there or on one of my videos or in the community tab, and I'll try to at least have something posted there. So that's all I have for today. I hope you are doing well and reading good books. And until next time, as Ray Bradbury would say, live forever.